The chandeliers blazed, the music swirled, and Adeline stood perfectly still at the edge of the ballroom, a ghost among the living. No one approached her, not even her husband. She had chosen the pale blue silk because a duchess should shine, but Julian St. Clair, the Duke of Montfort, had not so much as glanced at her. He stood near the far windows, deep in conversation with two gentlemen, his profile as sharp and unreadable as ever. She could trace that jawline in her sleep. She could trace the cold distance in it, too. A woman's whisper drifted from behind a fluted column. They say he married her out of duty. The Carlyles were ruined, you know. She brought nothing to the match but a fading name. Adeline's fingers tightened around her fan. She did not turn around. She had learned in 2 years of marriage to make her face as still as porcelain. No tears, no pleading looks. Never again. She left the ballroom at 10:30, walking alone through the great hall of Montfort House, her heels clicking on marble. Her lady's maid found her later, seated before a cold fireplace, still wearing the silk gown. The maid said nothing, only brought a shawl. That was the night Adeline stopped hopping. 2 years earlier she had stood in her father's study with trembling hands, a letter of proposal from the Duke of Montfort laid out on the desk. Her father had wept, not from joy, but from relief. The Carlyle estate was drowning in debt, her younger sisters facing an uncertain future, and the Duke's offer was a miracle in ink and sealing wax. She had never met Julian St. Clair before the day he came to finalize the arrangement. He arrived alone, tall and dark-haired, with the kind of restrained power that made servants scurry. He had looked at her with polite, distant regard and said, "I will provide everything you need. I ask only that you uphold the dignity of my name." She had nodded, her heart fluttering with foolish, girlish hope. He was handsome. He was honorable. Surely affection would grow, the way ivy gradually claims a wall. It did not. Montfort House was a masterpiece of gray stone and glittering windows set among the green hills of Somerset, but inside it was as quiet as a tomb. Julian was never unkind. He simply was never present, and when he was, he looked at her as if she were a particularly well-behaved guest who had overstayed her welcome. He answered her questions with a word or two, took his meals in the library, and slept in a separate bedchamber at the far end of the east wing. Adeline tried everything. She learned his favorite dishes and instructed the cook. She placed fresh flowers in the hall. She sat in the library at dusk, reading quietly, hoping he might notice her and perhaps stay for a conversation. He would walk in, see her, incline his head, and retrieve his book without ever sitting down. The worst moment came at the end of their first year. She had dressed carefully for a dinner he was hosting for local landowners, wearing emeralds that had belonged to his mother. When she descended the staircase, he looked up, and for one heartbeat his gaze lingered. Her breath caught. Then he said, "Those jewels suit you," and turned back to his steward. That was all, a compliment that felt like a door slamming shut. Still, she hoped. Love made her foolish. Then came the fever. It struck in January, a bitter wet month when the Somerset winds clawed at the windows. Adeline had been visiting the village school she'd begun to support, and she returned home shivering, her skin clammy. By nightfall she was burning, her throat raw, her dreams a tangle of fire and shadows. She remembered fragments, a cool cloth pressed to her forehead, a voice low and urgent calling her name, not your grace or madam, but Adeline. Hands holding hers, strong and warm, a thumb stroking her knuckles. She surfaced once from a haze of pain and saw him, Julian, seated at her bedside, his cravat loose, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He was murmuring something she could not understand. When she woke properly, 3 days later, weak as a newborn lamb, he was gone. A maid told her the Duke had barely left her side, that he had personally prepared her herbal drafts, that he had refused to let anyone else tend her. Adeline's heart soared. She dressed as soon as she could stand, brushed her hair until it shone, and went downstairs to find him. He was in the library, of course. He looked up from his correspondence and his expression was perfectly neutral. You are recovered. I am glad. Julian, she said softly, daring his name for the first time, I wanted to thank you. The servants said you. I did what any decent husband would do, he interrupted, his tone clipped. There is no need for gratitude. You should rest. And he returned to his letters as if she had already left the room. She stood there for a full minute, invisible. The hope inside her turned to ash. Spring came and Adeline stopped going to the library. She stopped arranging flowers and ordering his favorite dishes. She stopped waiting. Instead, she began walking down to the village each morning, a basket over her arm, her maid trailing behind. She spent hours at the little stone schoolhouse, helping the teacher with the youngest children, mending tattered books, telling stories to wide-eyed little girls who had never seen a duchess up close. She discovered that she was good at this. Her presence made the villagers less afraid of Montfort House. They began to smile when she appeared. Some of the older women took her into their confidence, sharing recipes and remedies. She felt, for the first time in years, like a person who mattered for herself, not for her title. And as she found purpose, something else happened. She began to change. She stood straighter. She laughed more. A natural warmth, long buried under layers of loneliness, began to shine from her. The village blacksmith's son said she had the kindest eyes in the whole county. The baker always saved her a fresh oat loaf. She still lived under Julian's roof, but she had stopped orbiting his son. Julian noticed. At first it was small. He looked up from his breakfast one morning and found her chair empty. "Her Grace is not dining," he asked the footman. "She left for the village early, Your Grace. She will take luncheon there." Julian said nothing, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A week later he passed by the morning room and heard her humming. He paused, listening. He could not name the tune, but it was light, content. She was writing in a little ledger, her brow furrowed in concentration. She did not sense his presence, and after a long moment he walked on, unsettled by a strange hollow feeling in his chest. That hollow feeling grew sharper the afternoon. He saw her in the garden with another man. The man was Nathaniel Gray, a young viscount and amateur painter who had recently returned from the continent. He was handsome in an open, easy way, with sandy hair and a ready smile. He had come to Montfort to discuss a boundary dispute with Julian, but he had found Adeline instead. She was kneeling by the rose beds, dirt on her gloves, laughing at something Nathaniel had said. The viscount was sketching her, his charcoal moving swiftly across the page. Julian stopped on the garden path. The sight hit him like a physical blow. She was so animated, so free. He had never seen her look at him that way. Never. "Your Grace," Nathaniel said cheerfully, noticing him, "you have the most charming wife. I hope you do not mind. She has been telling me about the village school. I think I shall make a donation myself." Adeline glanced up. When her eyes met Julian's, her smile faded into careful politeness. "Good afternoon, my lord. Mr. Gray has been very kind." "Has he?" Julian's voice was ice. "We should discuss the boundary matter, Gray, now." He turned and walked away, expecting the viscount to follow. He did not wait to see if he would. That evening, Julian found himself standing at the window of his study, watching the darkening garden. Adeline was still outside, walking slowly along the lavender hedge with Nathaniel, their heads close in conversation. The viscount said something that made her laugh again, a genuine, surprised sound that drifted up to the house like music. Julian's hand closed around the window frame. He felt something hot and unwelcome curling in his stomach. He tried to name it. Irritation, perhaps, concern for appearances, but it felt far too painful for that. Jealousy, sharp and bitter, was a language he had never taught himself to speak. A few days later, the house was quiet. Adeline had gone to the village as usual, and Julian found himself in her sitting room, a space he rarely entered. A book lay open on a side table. A shawl was draped over a chair, still carrying a faint scent of lavender. On the writing desk was the small ledger she had been so absorbed in. He knew he should not look. He opened it anyway. It was an account book, but not for household expenses. Every entry listed a need in the village: a new roof for the school, medicine for the miller's wife, shoes for the Carter children, warm cloaks for the elderly. Next to each item in her neat handwriting were notes. Ask Mr. Hale about slate. Speak to Dr. Ray, tincture. Wool ordered. She had been spending her own allowance discreetly and systematically to help everyone within her reach. Julian closed the ledger slowly. A strange ache spread through his chest. He had married a woman of quiet, extraordinary grace, and he had treated her as little more than a houseplant. The next afternoon, she returned from the village to find him waiting in the entrance hall. That was unusual enough to make her pause, her gloves half removed. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "I wish to speak with you." She followed him into the library, her heart beating a little too fast. She had stopped hopping, but her body had not stopped reacting to his nearness. She hated that. He stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel. "You spend a great deal of time in the village." "Yes, the people there need help. I find it fulfilling." "You are the Duchess of Montfort. There are expectations." Adeline's chin lifted. "I am not neglecting my duties. I host the dinners. I manage the accounts. I attend church. I smile when I am supposed to smile, but I will not apologize for doing something meaningful with my days." His eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second. She had never spoken to him so directly. "Viscount Grey," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I do not think it proper for you to spend so much time alone with him. Mr. Grey is a friend. He treats me with respect. He listens when I speak." The words were soft, but they landed like stones. "When was the last time you listened to me, Julian?" The silence that followed was terrible. He opened his mouth, then closed it. She saw something flicker across his face, confusion, perhaps guilt, but it vanished before she could name it. "I have done nothing improper," she continued, gathering her composure, "and I will not be made to feel ashamed of having a friend. Now, if you will excuse me, I am tired." She left him standing there, unmoving, the firelight casting long shadows behind him. That night Julian lay awake in his solitary bed, staring at the ceiling. Her words replayed over and over. "He listens when I speak. When was the last time you listened to me?" He could not remember. He had kept her at a careful distance from the very beginning, and he had told himself it was for the best. Now the distance was a chasm, and she was on the other side, and he did not know how to cross it. He had a reason he had never shared with anyone, a reason that pressed on his chest like a stone. But as the hours crawled toward dawn, he began to wonder if his reason was also his cowardice. The annual Montfort Summer Ball was the most anticipated event in the county. Adeline had organized it with her usual quiet efficiency, and the house glittered with candles and flowers. She wore a gown of deep rose silk, and as she moved among the guests, she radiated a calm, quiet beauty that drew eyes. Julian, standing near the orchestra, watched her with an intensity he could no longer hide from himself. Nathaniel Gray approached her early in the evening and asked her to dance. Adeline hesitated, then placed her hand in his. As they moved across the floor, she smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded. The other guests murmured approvingly. The Duchess, so often overlooked, was suddenly the center of admiration. Julian felt something crack inside him. He set down his glass and walked onto the terrace, the cool night air doing nothing to calm his pulse. He had no right to feel this. He knew that. He had pushed her away for 2 years. But watching another man hold her, watching her blossom under someone else's gentle attention, it undid him completely. When the dance ended, Adeline stepped outside for air and found him there, his back to her, hands gripping the stone railing. "Are you unwell?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. He turned. In the moonlight, his face was taut with an emotion she had never seen before. "Do you love him?" She blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Gray, do you love him?" The question was so raw, so unexpected that she almost laughed. "No, Julian, I do not love him. He is a friend, nothing more." She paused, and the next words came from a place of quiet, exhausted honesty. "But he makes me feel visible, and that is more than you have ever done." He flinched as though she had struck him. She did not stay to see if he would speak. She walked back inside, her heart hammering, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. A few days after the ball, Adeline was in the village, helping the schoolteacher prepare a lesson. The children were reciting their letters when a shadow fell across the doorway. She looked up and saw a man she did not recognize, a tall, broad-shouldered gentleman in a dark coat, his eyes a pale, unsettling gray. "Lady Adeline," he said, his voice smooth as oil, "it has been a long time." She rose slowly, a chill crawling down her spine. "I am the Duchess of Montfort now. I do not believe we have been introduced." "Oh, but we have. I am Lord Marcus Ashby. I knew your father briefly before your marriage." He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "You have become quite the village saint, I hear." There was something deeply wrong in his tone, a possessiveness that made her skin prickle. She excused herself quickly, gathered her basket, and hurried back toward the house, her heart pounding for reasons she could not explain. She did not see him follow. She did not know that Lord Ashby had been watching Montfort House for weeks. She did not know that the danger she had never been told about was now standing at her doorstep. Julian was in his study when his steward entered, face pale. "Your Grace, Lord Ashby has been seen in the village." He was speaking to the Duchess. Julian went very still, all the color drained from his face. "When?" "Less than an hour ago. She is unharmed, she returned to the house directly, but I thought you should know." Julian was already on his feet. He found Adeline in her sitting room, still visibly unsettled. She looked up as he entered, and the sight of his expression, fierce, almost frightened, made her forget her own fear. "What is it?" she asked. "The man who spoke to you in the village. You will not speak to him again. You will not go anywhere alone." Her confusion sharpened into anger. "You cannot command me like a servant. Who is he? Why does he frighten you?" Julian's jaw tightened. He looked as if he were warring with himself. "It is not your concern." "Not my concern." She rose, her voice trembling. "You have kept me at arm's length since our wedding day. You have made me feel like a stranger in my own home. And now a man approaches me with strange familiarity and you tell me it is not my concern. I have a right to know, Julian. I have a right." He stared at her, and for a moment she thought he would tell her. His walls were crumbling, she could see it in his eyes. But then he turned away. "I will post extra men at the gates. You will be safe." "Safe from what?" she cried, but he was already gone. That night a storm rolled over the Somerset Hills. Adeline lay in bed, listening to the rain lash the windows, her mind churning. She was tired of secrets, tired of the cold. She had spent 2 years in a gilded cage, and now she was told there were bars she could not even see. She fell asleep just before dawn, and when she woke, the world had changed. The note was slipped under her door. She found it when she rose, a folded piece of paper with her name written in an unfamiliar hand. Inside, the words were brief and chilling. "You were promised to me before the Duke stole you away. I have come to collect what is mine. Do not scream or others will pay." She dropped the note as if it were a serpent. Her legs carried her to Julian's study without conscious thought. She burst through the door without knocking. He was already standing, his face gray, holding his own piece of paper. He looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes stopped her breath. It was terror, not for himself but for her. "You have a letter too," she whispered. "Ashby," his voice was hoarse. "He will not touch you, I swear it. Tell me everything now." And finally, broken by fear and exhaustion and a love he had never voiced, Julian told her. 3 years ago, before I ever met you, Ashby was a guest at a hunting party on your father's estate. He saw you there just once and he became obsessed. He approached your father with an offer of marriage, but your father refused. Ashby is not a man who accepts refusal. He began to threaten your family. He had men in London, dangerous men. Your father was terrified, but he had no power to stop him. Julian's hands were shaking. I learned of it through a mutual acquaintance. I owed your father a debt. He saved my life during the war, took a bullet meant for me. He told me of Ashby's threats, and I saw a way to repay that debt. By marrying you, I could place you under my protection. Ashby could not touch a duchess without starting a war he could not win. Adeline's knees gave way. She sank onto a chair. All this time, she breathed, you married me to protect me. Yes. And the distance, the coldness. He closed his eyes. My sister died because of me. A man I had wronged years ago before I was Duke took her to hurt me. I could not save her. I swore I would never love anyone again because love paints a target on the people you hold dear. If I let myself care for you, Ashby would have used it. He would have seen it, and I could not risk. His voice broke. I could not risk losing you too. Silence fell between them, heavy as stone. Adeline's tears ran freely down her cheeks. She understood now. She understood the glances that never quite landed, the hands that pulled away, the library door that always stayed closed. It was fear. It had always been fear. Before she could speak, a crash sounded from downstairs, shattering glass and shouting. Julian was on his feet in an instant. Stay here, bar the door. No, she stood, her voice steady despite her tears. I will not hide. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and something in his expression broke open. Adeline, please. But she was already moving toward the door, her hand reaching for the heavy brass candlestick on the side table. She was afraid, terribly afraid, but she would not be a ghost in her own life any longer. They went down together. In the great hall, Lord Ashby stood with two rough-looking men, rainwater dripping from their coats, a broken windowpane scattered on the marble. Ashby's pale eyes fixed on Adeline with a hunger that made her stomach turn. There you are, my dear. You look even lovelier than I remembered. Leave this house, Julian said, stepping in front of her, or I will have you shot where you stand. Ashby laughed. You would not risk a scandal, a duke murdering a peer in his own hall. The crown would have your title. No, you will hand her over and I will be merciful. She was meant for me. Adeline's voice rang out, clear and fierce. I was never meant for you. I am the Duchess of Montfort and I belong to no one but myself, and I will die before I leave this house with you. Ashby's smile flickered. He took a step forward, and in that moment Julian moved. The fight was brutal and brief. Julian was not a trained soldier for nothing. He disarmed one man with a vicious blow to the jaw, but the other lunged at Adeline. She swung the candlestick with all her strength, catching the attacker across the temple, and he crumpled. Julian grappled with Ashby himself, and a blade flashed, a small knife Ashby had hidden in his coat. It slashed across Julian's side, but Julian did not stop. He drove Ashby to the ground, and by then the household guards, finally alerted, poured into the hall and seized the intruders. When it was over, Julian was on his knees, blood spreading through his shirt. Adeline dropped beside him, pressing her hands to the wound, her voice a frantic prayer. Stay with me. Please stay with me. Julian, look at me. He looked up at her, his eyes hazy with pain but full of something else, full of love unguarded at last. You were magnificent, he whispered. I should have told you every day you are the bravest person I have ever known. Hush, she sobbed, holding him. Save your strength. If I die, he murmured, know this. I loved you from the first moment I saw you in your father's study. I loved you so much it terrified me. Forgive me. You are not going to die, she said fiercely. You are going to live, and you are going to spend the rest of your life making up for every cold day, every silence, every moment I felt alone. Do you hear me? A faint, weak smile crossed his lips. I hear you. The surgeon came, and the night bled into morning. Julian's wound was deep but not fatal. He lay pale against the pillows, his hand wrapped tightly around Adeline, as if he was afraid she would disappear. She did not leave his side. She slept in a chair by his bed, and when he stirred in the darkness, she was there, her fingers brushing his forehead. "You stayed," he rasped. "I will always stay." She leaned closer, her lips near his ear. "But I will not go back to the silence. If we are to have a true marriage, you must let me in. No more secrets, no more walls." "No more walls," he repeated, and a tear slipped down his cheek. "I am so sorry, Adeline, for everything." She kissed his forehead, gentle as a blessing. "We begin again today." Months later, on a golden autumn morning, the village school held a small ceremony. The new roof had been completed, the walls freshly whitewashed, and the children sang a song they had practiced for weeks. The Duke and Duchess of Montfort sat on a wooden bench at the back, side by side, their shoulders touching. After the singing, a little girl with red ribbons in her hair ran up to Adeline and presented her with a garland of dried flowers. Adeline accepted it with a deep curtsy that made the child giggle. Julian watched, and the expression on his face was one of quiet, profound peace. As they walked home through the lanes, the hedgerows golden with turning leaves, he reached for her hand. She took it without hesitation. "I spoke to the steward this morning," he said. "We can rebuild the old almshouses. I thought you might wish to oversee it." She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "You are giving me a project, Your Grace." "I am giving you everything," he said softly. "Everything I have, everything I am, if you will have it." She stopped walking. A breeze stirred the leaves around them. She placed her hand on his chest, over the scar that now marked his skin. "I have always wanted only one thing, Julian. You, just you, warm and present in mine." He cupped her face in his hands, and there, on the quiet autumn lane, he kissed her. A kiss that held no coldness, no distance, only the promise of a love finally allowed to bloom. And in the house on the hill, the windows glowed with evening light, and the silence was filled at last with the sound of two hearts beating in perfect, healing rhythm.